Wonderful. So, hi everyone. Good morning. I know we're coming back from a long weekend, so I hope you grabbed yourself a nice cup of tea and some coffee, and you're here this morning just to sit back and learn about something new. So, as Maggie said, my name is Christen Kong. I'm one of the health promoters here at Access Alliance, really focusing on mental health using expressive arts therapies. I also am the HEAL project coordinator, which I will be speaking from today. But before I move forward, I also want to give a context background of how I have come to be here. I first began my journey studying art and environmental sustainability, and this really fascinated me on how natural ecosystems can be adapted to human systems. And from there, I found myself working in Etobicoke for a very small arts agency. And it was the first time I really witnessed the power and the potential of art to really not only transform places and spaces, but also people as well. And that really sparked a lot of questions for me on how art-based approaches can be integrated into other various ways in society, including settlement, healthcare, and mental health. I also spent some time in South Africa learning about the collectivist approach of trauma recovery through storytelling. We also integrated psychosocial aspects and also art-based Zulu traditional forms of dance and music and other art making forms. And so again, that just reaffirmed how can we rethink counseling or psychotherapy in a way that is more expansive, that includes the arts? And so now I am a registered social worker and working with newcomers here, really trying to gain momentum and greater reach with art-based programs at Access Alliance. So, oops, okay. So just a quick disclosure, this presentation today is a knowledge mobilization product, part of the project HEAL Hubs of Expressive Arts for Life, which is funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And so what does our time together look like this morning? Maggie, thank you for doing the land acknowledgement. I'm going to, after this, get into a little check-in to see who's in the room. I want to acknowledge the wealth of existing strengths and assets that each and every one of us hold. So I just have a couple of questions just to see what knowledge is out there. I'm going to share about Access Alliance's history on expressive arts, past to present, and then we're going to jump right into why expressive arts therapies and not other therapies as an intervention to improve mental health. And then we're going to take a look at HEAL, the HEAL project as a case study, and what that really looks like on the ground within our communities. And of course, this presentation would not be complete if I did not talk about cultural and trauma-informed expressive arts practices. And then lastly, if you are interested in bringing something like this to your agency, I'm going to briefly touch upon some initial questions that will help you think through how you can integrate this into your practice. And then I'll leave a good amount of room for Q&A discussions for us to end. All right. Okay, so some learning objectives. I hope that we leave today with an enhanced knowledge on expressive arts therapies as an intervention for trauma recovery, specifically among newcomer survivors of domestic violence. I hope that we gain a better understanding of the benefits of arts as a body-based approach for healing. I will share a little bit more about art-based methods within settlement and healthcare, which then will again lead to more knowledge on cultural and trauma-informed practice. And then lastly, I hope that it can spark, something new for you and your agency. All right, so getting to know you. We're not going to use anything fancy, no Slido, Miro, or Google Docs, but just in the chat function, the first question that we have here is, when you think about art for mental health, what comes to mind? And if you want to put that in the chat, we can see some of the things that the initial thoughts of what comes to mind when you think of art and mental health. So I'll just give a couple of minutes for that. Okay, someone said it makes me calm and focused. Yes, thank you. It is a way to express yourself without words. Yep. It's relaxing, healing, helps with communication. Art as a tool to channel or express emotions. Great. Yes, growth and resilience, sharing stories. Okay, wonderful. So you can keep those responses going. I'm going to, yes, thank you, acceptance. Lauren said, a way to express yourself in a creative new way that others may not understand. Yep, for sure. Trust and safety, identity and belonging, connection. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Yes, natural way for the lizard brain to release trauma. Thank you for that. All right. I'm going to transition to our second question, which is, how have you engaged in art within the work that you do? I just want to acknowledge too that all of us have different roles within our agency. So I'm curious, how have you engaged in art within the work that you do, however small and however big? Okay, painting classes for newcomers. hmm Using art in support groups. Yeah. Engage with my students by painting on canvases, creative interventions, imagery, art-based projects, weekly drop-ins. This is great. Okay. Self-care wellness programs. Okay, I see a lot of painting there. That's really exciting. Designing rocks. Okay, an art hub. This is wonderful. Ceramics with domestic violence survivors. Ooh, this is wonderful. Okay. And then the last question that I have here is, what do you want to know more about art-based methods and mental health? It can be a question, it can be a thought, it can be one word or a sentence, but I want to know, what do you want to know more of about art-based methods and mental health? So I'll give a couple moments for you to put that in the chat as well. Yeah, photography as a way of communicating experiences. Great, supporting artist friends with their endeavors, for sure. Yeah, wonderful. Optional art classes, a part of newcomer programs, how to tie art with trauma-focused care, art as therapy versus art therapy. Yep, wonderful. We're definitely going to get to that today. How to understand what's in the picture and how to describe a person's mood. Interpretation, resources for newcomers in Niagara region. Yep, for sure. When is the ideal time to introduce? These are wonderful. Okay, so thank you everyone for engaging with us in the chat. This also gives me a sense of what the narrative is out there in our sector around art-based practices. So continue to use the chat function. I'm going to close it on my screen. So Maggie, you're welcome to monitor the chat and support me in that. And I'm going to continue with the next slide. All right. So listening prompts, this is actually something that I learned from OCASI that I really loved, and it really is to enhance intentional listening. And so I'm going to show some questions on the screen, and these are to keep in mind as you listen throughout this presentation. So think questions such as, what surprised you or what was new for you? What made you feel hopeful or inspired? What resonated with you? What aligned with your experience or what did not align with your experience? The last two are my favorite. What are you curious about and what questions do you have? So feel free to screenshot this and keep this in the back of your mind, because I will stop midway through the presentation to re-ask these questions again, just to get our minds flowing, because not only are we listening, but there's a lot of thoughts that run through our minds as we're listening. So I hope these just give somewhat of a guide to us. Okay. All right, so who is Access Alliance? I know some of you may be familiar with the work that we do, and some of you may not be. So, Access Alliance provides services and really advocates to improve the health outcomes for immigrants, refugees, and their communities, which have made vulnerable by systemic barriers and poverty. We are a Toronto based agency, and we have a very strong commitment to the determinants of health. We use a interdisciplinary team model to respond to the many changing needs at the agency within the many contexts that we work through. I myself am part of the research and evaluation department. I think this is something unique to our community health center because we gather a lot of data and we use our data to inform a lot of our strategic planning and how to best meet, again, the changing populations of new immigrants coming into Canada. We have a high dedication to evidence-informed practice, and we are constantly seeking and creating partnerships, not only research, but also within service providers. Some of the things that we offer are primary healthcare services, community programs across the board that focus on food, sustainability, transportation, mental health. We also have a green access program, and if you visit one of our sites, we do have a green rooftop, which is really lovely in the spring and summertime. We also offer settlement services and counseling services. And so where are we located in the city? This is a very broad map of Toronto. We have 4 sites. We have one in the East End at Victoria Park and Danforth. We have one central downtown at Spadina and College, and one in the West End at Dundas West and Jane. We also have a Barrington location that focuses on babies and children, and we also have a primary health clinic in refugee hotel transitional hotels in Etobicoke. So this is really where we work out of. But of course, we also do work with our many organizational partners at their sites as well. And so you might be wondering, what is a settlement and healthcare agency playing with clay? So I'm going to share now and dive into Access Alliance's history of expressive arts programs to give you, again, um, another perspective on the context of the work that we do. So Access Alliance Expressive Arts programs actually started in 2002 with a pilot project using arts to restore the well-being of refugee women who had experienced violence. Very quickly, we saw how not only narrative therapy, but paired with expressive arts could provide a lot of trauma survivors with transformative experiences. Things like breaking social isolation, strengthening community connections, raising awareness of their rights and available supports. We also found that art making gave back the power and autonomy to a person to make choices, not only within the program, but also in other facets of their life. It also enhanced self-care and healthy relationships. And so over the last 2 decades, we've expanded all the different art modalities meet the needs and also to meet and parallel traditional cultural forms of art making. And so these 2 images that I popped up on the screen there um, is a project that was responding to the mass intake of Syrian refugees to Canada. And this was a project really looking at stories of loss and migration, and they were able to connect to a sense of home using embroidery artwork to encourage themselves and others. Over the last 2 decades of this work, we have done and conducted 3 large evaluations, and it led to the publication of in the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy, as you can see on the right-hand side on that Syrian embroidery project. And we also published a Stepping Up toolkit, and this toolkit really looks at promising practices using art-based programming to address issues of violence among the trans, lesbian, and bisexual newcomer community. So this is all found on our website. So if you are interested in looking for more practical toolkits, that's one that I would definitely recommend. And then fast forward to today, a lot of our expressive arts programs are collaborative. We pair an artist or community artist with a healthcare worker and co-create different healthcare and settlement-based programs. And so the last photo that I'll put up there is our women's wellness program. This is something that we did in last year, paired up with our dietitian team. And it was so much fun learning about healthy eating, gratitude, and the different parts of nutrition through different arts modalities. And what we found was that art making really was conducive to actually adopting knowledge in healthcare. So all to say is that I think pairing art as a complementary approach is very conducive when we're talking about settlement topics, topics on mental health and healthcare. And so I'm going to get a little bit more minute here. Expressive arts as an intervention for trauma recovery in specific. So I'm going to talk about what is expressive arts. I know someone put in the chat, what is the difference between art therapy, art for well-being, or expressive arts? So we're going to take a look at that. Okay, so I'll first start by saying when people hear expressive arts or art therapies, there's many preconceptions. A lot of people perk up because art is very fun and it's very abstract and fluid, and it is a form of expression that is adopted by many cultures all over the world. But on the other hand, sometimes art can also be very intimidating. Something that I hear often when community members come to programs, they say, I'm not an artist. But once they start to engage and they realize that actually they have an immense capacity for expression and creativity, it opens up a whole other world. And so going back to this quote that I have here, expressive arts therapy really is the purposeful use of movement, music, image making, performance, writing, play, and imagination within the healthcare, psychotherapy, and wellness sector. It really is using many different art modalities combined, whereas with art therapy focuses on visual arts as the main way for well-being or healing. And so just to give you a little bit more, literary, visual, and performance, multimedia, those are all considered types of art modalities within the expressive arts therapy realm. And it really is guiding people through the different art modalities to enhance self-expression, to understand what their feelings or narratives or thoughts are. And so when we host expressive arts programs, it's not only one modality that we're looking at, we're interchanging them and bringing them through maybe poetry to a drawing to sculpting to a performance at the end. So it's quite playful and fun. And I love the word imagination because often those who experience trauma, it's very difficult to imagine a life other than the one maybe that they're defining for themselves through their traumatic experience. And so imagination allows for another narrative to really come about within a person's life. So I'm going to share about what does this look like? What does this look like in real life? The different changing of modalities. And before I do that, I'm going to give the context behind the HEAL project, which is the case study that I will be using today to showcase expressive arts as a modality for healing. So you might have heard of the shadow of the pandemic. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it really heightened a lot of social inequalities and health emergency issues within our societies and around the world. And so the shadow of the pandemic today is really referring to violence against women and girls, or gender-based violence. So the Canadian government in 2023 released this report. It's actually an international report of 150 civil society organizations across 71 countries stating that gender-based violence has surged alarmingly as a result to the lockdown measures due to COVID-19. And so because of this, a lot of women and their families were stuck at home and stuck with their abusers. They were not able to go outside. And so domestic violence really heightened the health risks and danger for a lot of folks. Next here, I want to highlight as well, when you think about nationally, the Canadian Femicide Observatory in 2021 tracks all the femicides that have happened nationally. And again, they have reported a surge and increase of these. And it's actually a trend that has been happening in the past 5 to 7 years, the increase of femicides. One thing I want to note that I really like about the report is that they've noted that, especially for newcomers, there's not adequate data of reports in Canada showing the um, the state of newcomer gender-based violence. This is due to surveys not being in language appropriate formats. It also does not reach newcomers in the way that we want it to. So all to say is that be mindful of statistics around newcomer data and gender-based domestic violence, because often the number is actually higher than what we are seeing. And then lastly, this is a headline among many, many headlines across Canada, that newcomers are, again, face very unique barriers vulnerable to domestic violence. And this includes also stress associated with migration, geographic and social isolation, the change in family dynamics when someone immigrates to a new country. There's a lot of different power imbalances, loss of culture, family structures, economic insecurities. All to say is that newcomers face unique barriers on top of other populations that experience domestic violence. And so, what does this mean? This is really a warning sign, asking us, how are we responding? And I just want to say that the context that this project that I will be speaking about is actually for survivors of domestic violence. There's an incredible team of people among many different agencies that are really working at the crisis response safety planning level. But I want to draw our attention to this report published by the Arab Community Centre of Toronto that said a study of survivors of intimate partner violence in the GTA, 88% of them were actually identified as newcomers or immigrants. So how are we responding also to survivors that are coming out of violence? How are they being integrated and dealing with their trauma recovery? Because as we know, violence stays with us for many, many years and decades, even after violence has ended. All right, so that really is the context to this project. So again, how are we responding? As Access Alliance, we are responding by the emergence of this project called HEAL, which stands for Hubs of Expressive Arts for Life. It is funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada and across 4 years. So we are currently in ending our second year into our third year. So I'll talk a bit about what this project looks like. So I've put a brief timeline there at the top, but I'm going to use this little wave line to share more about where we're at and where we're headed. So in the beginning, we established a project team, which is myself, the project coordinator, as well as a research lead, and also the project champion, which is our ED of Access Alliance. And we also put together an advisory committee of 8 to 10 experts in the field of domestic violence, health promotion, settlement, healthcare. We also onboarded expressive arts therapists and art therapists, part of the advisory team, as well as academic advisors. And from there, we started to plan and really put together a design for the research and tools for evaluation. How are we measuring the efficacy of the intervention that we are coming up with? And so we applied for our REB, and thankfully we were successful in our research design, as well as all of the components that go along with it. And so entering year 2, we started the implementation of the programs. Sorry, I think the dates are kind of off. But in year 2, we started the implementation within 3 organizations, a program intervention. The program is a 12-session intervention model, really using expressive arts therapies as the foundation of trauma recovery, knowledge and skill building, as well as community bonding. And we are here. We're continuing to test and improve tools. We are learning through participant feedback as well as our facilitator feedback. And we are continuing in year 3 to implement into 3 more organizations. So that's really exciting. Finally, when we wrap up the intervention, we hope to develop a bilingual report and other deliverables, including training curriculums for service providers like yourself, social media campaigns, policy briefs, intervention tools, and peer-reviewed journals. And my favorite part is really to disseminate this knowledge. something that I think will contribute to the growing body of evidence within the expressive arts therapy sector, as well as settlement, healthcare, and mental health. So look forward to that, and I will keep you all updated on those progressions. So what is the intervention? I have here a very brief summary of what the intervention looks like. Again, it is a 12-session program that begins with session 1, Welcome and Orientation. This brings together the facilitation team and gets them acquainted with the participants. Because it is a research project, we do have to go through various consent to ensure that participants understand the commitment and what they are getting themselves into. And then we enter into part 1, which is safety and stabilization. This really is about psychoeducation. How are we equipping our participants with the knowledge about trauma in the body? What does that look like? How can we identify it? And then use self and co-regulation tools that are art-based to help us understand calming and regulating techniques. What's really crucial is that safety and stabilization also helps with part 2 and part 3 when we dive into more difficult discussions. In part 2, we have identity, culture, and community. For those who have worked with newcomers, identity, culture, and community is very key when we're speaking about what home looks like, what safety looks like, or what safety or home does not look like. And so in this part, we use plasticine and clay making as tactile art modalities to explore some of those narratives. Again, as people share about the work that they do, we often, again, go back to phase 1 and review the self and co-regulation techniques so that they can really practice and feel what does it look like to calm our nervous system down when we think of maybe difficult memories or experiences. Then we enter into part 3, towards resilience, hope, in the future. And a lot of you I saw put painting in the chat. We do in this part collectively work on 2 collective paintings, and this is really envisioning a new self or a new future for the self. So it's quite fun. And a lot of women at that point have gained knowledge throughout part 1 and part 2 that really inspire these collective paintings. One thing too is that between part 2 and 3, we ask guest speakers to come in to talk about human rights, healthy relationships, as well as empowerment, self-defense across 4 of our partner agencies. And that really also equips participants with knowledge. I'm going to jump back to the diagram in the green. We then end in a culminating event that really celebrates and honors the dedication of participants that have gone through a 3-month journey together. And I do have to say, even in our other expressive arts programs, celebration and coming together is actually a really key important aspect of honoring the process of art making and people feeling like they are an artist and have something to say. So this intervention program, as you can see the arrow, it is hosted among those 6 different intervention groups, including Arabic, Bengali, and Farsi-speaking newcomers. We also, in phase 2, are hosting it within Tigrinya, LGBTQ+, and women living in shelters. I'm going to now put a lot of words on the screen. No need to read all of them, but really, when we take a step back, what is the purpose of this project? It really is to identify the most effective expressive arts modality to improve the health and well-being of gender-based domestic violence survivors. We have a woven in comprehensive cycle of evaluation that happens pre, during, and post-program so that we can really measure the participants' change in attitudes, knowledge, and practices that come out of the program. And then lastly, the successful interventions, we hope to scale it up and adapt it to agencies and practices like yourself. Okay, so that is the HEAL project. That was a lot of information. Oopsie, I'm just going to go back there. So now this sets us up really well to talk about the 4 functions of expressive arts therapies. Some of you may in here may be artists yourselves, so this might be kind of an interesting knowledge gaining of how art actually leads into this framework of self-regulation, co-regulation, exploration, and restoration. And again, this is just a framework. You don't have this, all four of them don't need to be present at once. Sometimes there's more self-regulation than restoration in some moments during the recovery process of trauma. And so all to say is that these are just tools that you can use or language that you can use in some of the work that you do. All right. So the first is self-regulation. It really is the most basic function found to help with trauma recovery. Regulation is the most researched in art therapies, and it really looks at psychoeducation paired with somatic resourcing. So a lot of you may have read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Van der Kolk is very well known for his research in how trauma is stored in the body. And what that tells us is that it's not only cognitive, but every single sense holds a story of trauma. And so we need to look at our senses to understand what is the whole picture of how a person is experiencing trauma. I will also put our buddy over here, which is Peter Levine. Some of you also may know of him, but he is also, he is the founder of somatic resourcing, which is a body-based healing practice, showcasing that our bodies have a lot of strength. What does it look like to use our senses as a form of regulation when we may not have other means to do so? And so when we look at the HEAL project, what can this look like? Self-regulation, we often start with tactile or movement-based exercises to get people back in tune with their bodies. These are images of a lot of art materials sprawled on the table. We often allow participants to play around with different art modalities because we recognize some people may have preferences for others. For markers, oil pastels, plasticine, clay, dance ribbons. And so we allow them to play around, and it's this playful kind of space that they really get back into sensing the things that they once did. Maybe before a traumatic incident. As you can see there, we often pair plasticine. We have a prompt around a certain topic, and we give them time to create out of plasticine. And then we transition into journaling. What is your plasticine creation telling us about who you are and maybe the thoughts or stories that you have? And then they enter into writing. We give them time. We often put on music as well to activate the sound sensory element. And then after writing, we share one word or one sentence that then gets pooled together into a collective poem. So that's just a really simple way of going through the multimodality ways of expressive arts therapies. One thing that we found participants really loved is that funny looking instrument on the bottom left-hand side, and it's called a tongue drum. It has a very similar sound to a singing bowl, but much easier to play. And we often use that to do breath work. The different tones allows for people to really concentrate on their breath in ways that maybe they couldn't before. And so all to say is that self-regulation really helps to decrease anxiety. It regulates the body, it calms the nervous system down, and it activates our senses so that we're able to dive deeper into some of those trauma narratives or sensations that maybe talk therapy may not activate. Okay. The next is co-regulation. Co-regulation is about working together in relationship to the person. It believes that all recovery and healing ultimately takes place in the context of relationships. It's about finding synchrony or attunement. So when we talk about the therapeutic of relationship, art making really strengthens the therapeutic relationship if it's a one-on-one session, and it also strengthens group cohesion if it's a group session. And so one of the ways that we co-regulate is using dance ribbons. This is an image of the Bengali group being outside using co-regulation as a way to witness each other. What's really nice is that you can create rhythms. It also provides visually a way to see each other's movements through the yeah, the colors of the ribbons. And it also allows us to do many different things. Not only does each person is allowed to do their own gesture, but we can also copy and do a call and response gesturing. We can also do mirroring, which helps people to come in tune with each other. And I think it's one of the most exciting things that participants always remember from the HEAL programs is the dance ribbons. We also often put on music that, again, adds in another sense of attunement to the other senses. And so this on the screen, as I said, it enhances positive attachment, cohesion of healthy relationships, and really, again, essential in working with trauma and stress. I want to also say that in the past, there's a myth that talk therapy or narrative therapy is something that has to happen when doing trauma recovery. But I want to just emphasize that nonverbal ways of storytelling is also telling a story. So how are we as practitioners also recognizing that um, those stories are telling us something about the body, heart, spirit, and soul? This is another way too of attuning ourselves to each other. So after we do self-regulation with creating our personalized plasticine creations from prompt, we then bring it together to make a collective installation. We often put it on a table and we all walk around observing how do we fit in the greater narrative of this group and the greater narrative of our community. So that's another way of co-regulating with each other. And I'll put one more image there, which is nest making. Nest making is something that one of our expressive arts therapists introduced to us, but you can't see it on the screen here, but we have a rubber ducky that lives in this nest, and all the women will use different natural materials to build what a safety and trusting environment looks like for the rubber ducky in parallel to maybe what's happening in their lives as well. Okay. So moving on to the third one, which is exploration. Expressive arts really is about helping people explore other ways of nonverbal expression. A lot of people already wrote that in the chat this morning. Expression is really something that popped out to people. So again, whether it's movement, sound, vocalization, enactment, image making, or collective painting, exploration evokes imagination and creativity. I want to share this book, Trauma and Expressive Arts Therapy. A lot of the content that I'm sharing today is coming from this book and from this author, Kathy Malchiotti, who is 100% a guru of this expressive arts modality. And so I encourage you to check out her work. She has a lot of great videos on YouTube as well. So what does this look like, exploration? Um, it's through creating in non-threatening ways to explore the self. Sometimes, actually often, traumatic incidences is very difficult to retell horrifying things that happen to you. And so this gives way to exploring other nonverbal ways of sharing what happened or maybe where you want to go. And they're called illuminative narratives because it's a different type of expression towards emotions and thoughts through the arts. This function is important because you can do it again individually and collective, and there's no limits, which is really important, especially for those who have experienced control, violence in control, or those who are isolated. They feel the bounds of that type of violence, and so exploration allows them to re-expand themselves into other ways of being. And then I just put that last one there, which is again this idea of creating a nest and what the different nests that people create for themselves to create to feel safety and trust. Okay. And then lastly, the ultimate goal of expressive arts therapy is to help people receive and restoration or the reclaiming of the self, is to really witness the individual, family, or group to recover wholeness through a sense of well-being, resilience, and social engagement. In trauma work, it includes the capacity to be playful and curious, and it activates, like I said, imagination. And so what does that look like? Again, restoration is the ability to be engaged with the self and others, not in the flight or fright or the other kind of trauma responses. It often talks about reframing because we can't change what happened to someone, but we can restore a new perspective of what happened to them. So often this is about reinvention of the self and re-envisioning. This is another book share for you, which is the Expressive Arts Continuum. This is a framework for within art therapy, but can also be applied to expressive arts therapy of how to go from a sensory as the base all the way to cognitive to meaning making in this part of restoration. And then this is another photo of how one woman in one of our programs reimagined her speaking with the person who had harmed her. And so imagination allows for a reality that may not be present in our own, but something that we would like to happen. And so that in itself is empowering and can bring a lot of hope for a lot of people. So that's restoration. Okay, I am going to reshare listening prompts. This is also my cue to take a sip of water. But as you read through these questions, what surprised you? What was new for you? What made you feel hopeful or inspired? What resonated with you? What aligned with your experiences? What are you more curious about? And what questions do you have? So I'm just going to pause there for a minute or two. Again, you're welcome to share that within the chat before we move on to the next question. The next slide. Okay. Okay, thank you for the question that's in the chat. I can definitely speak to this after the presentation. Mhm. Okay, I'll give a couple more seconds. You can jot down your questions. Okay, I will continue. Thank you. Oh, I see some responses. I'll just read out some of them. Yep, I'm reflecting on how mothers could have the opportunity to reconnect with themselves for sure. Nonverbal storytelling is storytelling 100%. Inspiring to hear that traditional talk therapies are not necessarily needed for sure. Yep, I definitely think that expressive arts therapies challenges a lot of myths around trauma recovery. It's entering into territory that maybe we haven't tapped into enough. Okay, I shall continue. All right. So I know trauma-informed is spoken about so much in our sector, so I just want to talk about trauma-informed in relation to expressive arts. And there's five principles that I would like to go through. Actually, expressive arts therapies has 7 of them, but I'm going to start with these 5 foundational ones first. And if you are interested, it is found in Kathy Malchiotti's book that I previously shared. And we can certainly share those resources in an email following this webinar. Okay. So the first is trauma is part of many disorders, and it challenges people from all ages and all backgrounds. So no one is immune to trauma. Knowing a person's trauma history can help us not only better understand the responses that their body is expressing, but it can also help to inform better tailoring of interventions for trauma recovery. For example, for domestic violence survivors, a common Common mental health symptoms are PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, complex trauma. And so again, diving into on our end as service providers, knowing a person's trauma history can give us more hints onto what type of trauma interventions will help with what they are experiencing. The next is the mind and body. I know I keep saying this, that trauma lives in the body, and there's so much research out there, but it truly is something that we need to keep in mind is that trauma is really in the realm and emphasizes the role of the body, neurobiology, neurodevelopment to understand the inner workings of how to address trauma. It is not only involving the cognitive self, but it is part of a larger system, not only talking about the body, but also relationships with people, the environment, and other systems that impact that impacts their recovery experience. So another symptom of domestic violence survivors that they can have post-violence is dissociative disorders. So feeling a sense of disconnectedness from reality, oneself, and surroundings. So again, when we think back to some examples from the HEAL project, things like dance ribbons, or even coming back to your breath through sound, or recreating a world through plasticine, it helps people come back into their own bodies, be in tune with what is happening, and it can mitigate some of these dissociative disorders that participants often may feel. What's also interesting in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is that the author talks about the impact to the bronchi area. So again, when someone experiences trauma, they found that it actually limits the capacity of the bronchi area of the brain, which is really the center of speech, which is the center of speech and language. So for any trauma survivors, speech and language is very difficult for some of them. And so again, looking towards the arts, looking towards other senses of expression really can help with this kind of limitation that might happen. The third is adaptive coping versus a pathology. So I really like this quote here that says, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. And this is written by Viktor Frankl. And he wrote about being in concentration camps, that is a abnormal situation. And so therefore people will have abnormal also bodily reactions. And so instead of pathologizing participants and their responses to survival, what might be helpful is asking, what happened to you versus what is wrong with you? So language plays a huge part when we do this type of work and how we see and frame participants. Again, psychoeducation helps to reframe trauma reactions and behaviors as actually normal and adaptive in order to survive. I put an example there that war veterans are now embracing the idea that PTSD is not necessarily a disorder, but a normal reaction to war because war is abnormal. So this, again, if you work at a healthcare agency, it challenges the medical model of mental health, which is very helpful. It destigmatizes a lot of situations and it changes the dynamic that you have with participants or the clients that you work with. The fourth is culturally informed and collaboration. So again, are we seeing someone as a patient or a participant? I love the word participant too, because it really shows that they become part of their own treatment process, that they facilitate plannings of the services and programs tailored to their needs. We want to invite them into the process versus imposing things onto them. It's about sharing power dynamics and also decision making to allow a greater sense of self-efficacy to make their own choices. Again, often those who experience domestic violence, they are not making their own choices. They are constrained, constrained by their abusive partner. A lot of them also believe that their status is connected to someone else and they don't have control. And so providing them and giving them a sense of control is very important when doing this work. Something else is also asking them, what does healing look like for you? The arts is not for everyone. It can help actually gain more knowledge on other types of strengths or healing ways in their life. So I've also put an example there that I often hear. Spirituality is a large component of newcomer spaces of healing. What does it look like to work alongside faith communities to improve the health outcome of newcomers? So that's just something to take into account. And then lastly, things that I think many of you already do is collaboration, always be in collaboration with participants. Partially why I think evaluation and feedback is so important, because it gives participants a chance to voice what they think about the programs or workshops that we put on for them, and it makes them feel heard. All right, and the last one is survival to thriving. Increased sense of autonomy to enhance personal resilience and capacity for post-traumatic growth. Seeing people as thrivers versus survivors. This is very strength-based approach, realizing that people have assets and strengths already distilled within them. They have survived so much already. And so how are we highlighting that within them? And how are we looking towards them for the next steps of maybe their trauma recovery? Something also important is peer support and mutual self-help. This is all about producing resilience or making aware of resilient systems of care within a person's life. And then lastly, I want to also highlight being knowledgeable on various types of traumatic experiences. Trauma is very multidimensional, whether it's acute, chronic, complex. ACE, which is the adverse childhood experience, developmental or intergenerational, again, really determines what type of art modality might help, and also what type of intervention paired with the arts might help. All right. So that was kind of an abrupt stop to the trauma-informed 5 principles. And I'm coming to the conclusion of the presentation, which is expressive arts approach at your agency. I don't have anything laid out because there is not one model that fits all agencies. So I just have some questions for you to percolate with your team or your agency on how this might be something feasible or something interesting for you to integrate. So the first is, what art-based experience does your agency have? Again, looking at existing strengths within your agency and building off of that. We don't need to create something new. Art in itself is creating on top of each other and really building on what we already have. So this might include investigative work. Find out staff members who've been at the agency for a very long time to see what has been done, what has worked, and maybe what hasn't worked. The next is, where can we adapt, enhance, or innovate? Again, once you do and lay the foundations of what your agency has done, this second kind of phase is a lot easier to do. Where can we adapt? What can we do better? What can we do more of? And maybe where can we innovate, where we need a little bit more imagination or creativity. The third is, what knowledge or training do we need? Not all of us are expressive arts therapists. I myself am a social worker. I'm not an expressive arts therapist. And so the learning definitely is ongoing. But there are expressive arts therapists within our city, and art therapists and people within community arts and artists that you can reach out to. And so it's knowing who and where to partner with to gain that type of specific knowledge for the population that you're working with, and to do trainings. There's a lot of really great trainings with the CRATE Institute or the Art Therapy Institute of Toronto that I would highly recommend. It could be something that employees use their professional development towards, and then bring back the knowledge to your agency. And then the last there is, what capacity does the agency have to integrate art-based approaches? I know funding is always a sore point for all of us, but I encourage us to also ask, if we do not have funding, what is feasible? Art, the different art modalities doesn't need much. Sometimes just having a portable speaker or tapping on a table or having paper and pens is just enough to bring some sort of art expression into your program. And that's something too that we are exploring. You know, what are other avenues of bringing about art-based programs if we don't have the funding, or what are funders that we need to look towards? I think the healthcare and settlement sector often look towards the same funders. Are we diving into other sectors like the art sector to look for funding for the work that we do? And then again, short and long-term envisioning. This is a perspective that I often think about is often within an agency, there's one art program that happens for the whole year and it was amazing. Participants want it to happen again, but it sometimes is just not feasible. And so thinking through how can we make things sustainable so that we can actually keep art programming as something longer term versus one-off sessions or one-off programs that that happen. And then lastly, I will just say that today is a part one of a two-part series. So if you are interested in more of the nitty-gritty kind of practice on the ground, I will be leading next week, same time, Tuesday at 10 a.m., a session called Learn It and Lead It, where I will be sharing about specific activities that we use within our agency and approaches where you're at, because we work with healthcare providers that may not be well versed in the arts. And so this is just a way that they can feel like they can adapt into their current practice. And so some takeaways. I know you probably have your own takeaways, but one thing that I would love for you to leave with is just knowing that expressive arts therapy is an effective approach to trauma recovery, especially for newcomer individuals. That trauma recovery is recognizing the mind and body connection. And without recognizing that, I think we're highly misinformed in how we're doing trauma recovery practice. I want you to leave knowing that the settlement and healthcare sectors would benefit from integrating in the arts, whether it's in a small or larger capacity. And lastly, that yeah, you just have a greater understanding of what trauma-informed practice looks like within the arts, and that you're leaving with more curiosities about art-based approaches. And in that photo on the left-hand side, we are certainly building this nest together. So you are not alone in exploring this. So I'll leave off here with a Q&A. So thank you so much. And I would love to open it up to everyone here with some questions that you might have.